They called me a thief in my own house. On a stormy night, my own blood, my son and his wife threw me out like a stranger. They thought age had broken me. They thought I would never rise again. But what they don't know is this. An old lion may rest, but he never forgets how to roar. Before the story begins, my friends, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if this story from my life touches you, inspires you, or feels meaningful in any way, do give it a like and share it with others. Now, let's begin. My name is William Harris. I am 65 years old, and I carry a story buried deep inside my bones, a story of betrayal, humiliation, and revenge. People often think that when you grow old, you should rest, smile at your grandchildren, and watch the world in peace. But my old age was not peace. It was war. Silent war inside the walls of the very house I built. I was not born into wealth. No, I built it. Every brick of my house in San Francisco, every dollar in my company's account, every inch of my reputation, I earned with sleepless nights and relentless days. When I was young, I worked at docks, lifting cargo with hands that bled. Later, I saved, invested, and slowly built a small construction company that grew into one of the most respected firms in California. For decades, people called me Mr. Harris, the man who built dreams. And through all that, I had one dream of my own. My son, David. David was my pride, my only child. When he was born, I remember holding him in my arms and thinking, this boy will carry everything forward. He will protect our name. He will protect the legacy. I gave him everything I never had. The best schools, the finest clothes, the warmest home. He studied at Lowell High School, then Stanford. When I saw him graduate in that black robe, I cried like a child. I thought to myself, William, your work is done. Your son will take it from here. But how wrong I was. David grew up in comfort. He never knew the hunger I had known. He never knew what it was like to work under the burning sun or return home with broken hands. For him, life was already soft, easy, and maybe that was my mistake. I gave too much, and in return I raised a man who valued nothing. Still, I believed, I trusted. When David married Julia, I welcomed her into the house with all my heart. Julia was elegant, outspoken. She called herself a social activist, always busy in community programs, giving speeches about justice and equality. On social media, she posted pictures with captions about kindness. But inside my home, I saw none of that kindness. To me, she showed only indifference. I was the old man, someone whose time had passed. She smiled in public, but behind closed doors she cut me down with words that stung. Dad, you should rest. Don't interfere. The world is not your time anymore. Then came Cynthia, Julia's younger sister. 25 years old, wild, like fire with no control. She stayed in my house as if it was her own. Nights spent in clubs, returning drunk, cigarettes in her purse, laughter that echoed with strangers' names. I would watch her stagger into the house at 2 or 3 a.m., and the smell of alcohol would follow her through the hallways. I thought to myself, this will poison my home. But no one listened. David laughed it off, Julia defended her, and I was just a silent witness in my own house. And then there was Frank, my grandson, just 13, yet already lost. Cigarettes in his little hands, lies on his tongue, disrespect in his eyes. One evening, I caught him smoking in the backyard. I tried to stop him, but he looked straight at me and said, "Stay out of my life, old man." Those words pierced me deeper than any knife could. I wanted to shake David to make him see what was happening to his son. But David, my David, was too far gone. Because David had another obsession. Not his wife, not his family. No, his weakness was his secretary. A young, ambitious woman at my company who knew exactly how to play with him. She realized David craved attention, that he was foolish with money, eager to feel important, and she fed that hunger. He showered her with gifts, expensive dinners, and money taken straight from the company accounts. I noticed the numbers changing, I saw the balance sheets bleeding. But when I questioned him, David shouted, "Dad, you don't understand business anymore. The world has moved on from your methods." Julia, instead of stopping him, supported him. She said, "He's a grown man, William, don't interfere." And Cynthia, she laughed, mocking me. "The old man is paranoid. Maybe it's time you stepped aside." Every night I sat alone in my study, staring at the walls I had built, the books I had collected, the photographs of a family I once thought was mine. And every night my heart cracked a little more. Do you know what it feels like to live in your own house like a stranger? To walk in the hallways you built, yet feel invisible? That was my life. The respect I had earned from the world meant nothing inside these walls. Here, I was just a burden. But I stayed silent, because silence was the only weapon left to me. I told myself, they are young. They don't understand. One day they will. I kept waiting for that day, and then came the night of storm and rain, the night when my silence was shattered forever, the night when they accused me of being a thief in my own house. That night, the rain came like an army marching from the sky. The wind screamed against the windows, thunder rattled the glass panes, and the lights flickered as if even God wanted me to see the darkness that was about to unfold. I remember sitting in my study, the same oak desk where I had signed the papers of my very first company deal 30 years ago. I was reading, trying to ignore the storm outside, when suddenly I heard raised voices in the hallway. At first I thought it was just Julia scolding Cynthia for her late-night habits. But then I heard David's voice, loud, sharp, cutting. My heart froze. David never raised his voice like that unless something was terribly wrong. I opened the study door and what I saw will never leave me. They were all there, David, Julia, and Cynthia. Even little Frank standing behind them with his arms crossed, smirking like he was enjoying a show. On the table in the living room, there was a small velvet box, one that belonged to Julia. Inside it had been her jewelry, expensive pieces I had once gifted on David's wedding day. But that night it was empty. Julia's voice pierced through the storm. "We know it was you, William. Stop pretending you took the jewelry. You've been taking things from this house for months, haven't you? The missing money, the missing watch, the silverware. Who else could it be?" I felt my chest tighten. "What nonsense is this?" I shouted back. "Why would I steal from my own house, from my own family?" But Cynthia stepped forward, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Oh, please. You think we don't see? You're old. Your business mind is gone. Maybe you need money for yourself, or maybe for that so-called friend of yours in the hills. Don't act innocent." David's face was cold, harder than I had ever seen. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes. "Dad, enough, stop lying. We found your coat in the closet with Julia's box inside it." "How do you explain that?" I was stunned. I hadn't touched that box, hadn't even known where Julia kept it. The realization hit me like a slap. They had planted it. My own son, my blood, had set me up. My hands trembled. "David, my son, listen to me. You know me better than anyone. Do you truly believe your father would steal? After everything I've built? After everything I've given you?" But he didn't flinch. His jaw tightened. "I believe what I see, and what I see is betrayal." The storm outside roared louder, but nothing was louder than the storm inside my chest. Julia's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "We can't let you stay here anymore. This house is no longer safe with you in it. From tonight, you leave." My knees nearly buckled. "Leave? This is my house. The house I built with my own hands, my sweat, my life." But Cynthia laughed, a harsh mocking sound. "Not anymore, old man. Times have changed. You're not the king of this castle. You're just a burden, and now you're a thief too." And then David, my own flesh and blood, spoke the words that shattered me. "If you don't leave, Dad, I'll call the police and you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell. Is that what you want?" For a moment, I thought I would collapse. My breath came in gasps, my vision blurred with tears. I looked at Frank, hoping, just hoping, that my grandson, my little boy, would defend me. But he only shrugged, his teenage arrogance dripping in every word. "Yeah, Grandpa, maybe jail is where you belong." That was it. That was the knife to my heart. I stood there, drenched not in rain, but in betrayal. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dream I had carried for them, it all came back to mock me. My son, my daughter-in-law, her sister, even my grandson, they had all turned against me. I felt my body shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper, an anger I had never known before. Still, I said nothing. I realized words meant nothing to them now. So I walked to my study one last time. I picked up my old leather coat, the same one I had worn when I first started the business. I looked around at the shelves of books, the photographs of a younger William smiling with his family. For a second, I thought about begging. For a second, I thought about falling on my knees and pleading with David to remember who I was. But no, my pride was the only thing I had left, and I would not let them take that too. I walked out of the house into the storm. The rain struck, my face like needles, the wind almost throwing me to the ground. I didn't take an umbrella. I didn't take money. I didn't take anything except the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. As the door slammed behind me, I heard Julia's voice echo one last time. "Don't you dare come back, William. You're no longer welcome here." And so at 65, soaked and broken, I became a wanderer. Not because I had lost everything, but because the people I had given everything to decided I was worth nothing. That night, as I stumbled through the streets under the angry sky, a thought grew inside me like fire. A thought I had never allowed before. This is not the end. This is the beginning. They think they've buried me, but they have only awakened something far more dangerous. One day, I will return. Not with love, not with kindness, but with revenge. That night the storm carried me away from the only home I had ever known. My boots sank into the mud as I walked with no direction, my coat soaked through, my body trembling. The city lights of Los Angeles blurred behind the curtain of rain, and I realized that with every step, I was leaving not just a house but an entire life. I remember reaching the bus terminal on the edge of town, shivering like a beggar. I had no suitcase, no money, not even identification on me. Just a name burning in my heart. Thomas Reed, my old college friend, my brother in everything but blood. I hadn't seen him in years, but if there was one man I could trust, it was Thomas. When we were young, Thomas and I studied together at UCLA. We had big dreams, me of building a business, him of living a quiet life in the hills. He was the kind of man who believed in the soil and nature, in the honest work of the hand. When my business took off, I often sent him money to expand his farm. He had always said, "William, I don't need your money, but I'll take it because I know it comes from your heart." That was Thomas, humble, grounded, and loyal. So, in the dead of night, half drowned by the rain, I found a bus headed north. I don't even remember how I convinced the driver to let me ride without a ticket. Maybe he saw the pain in my eyes. Maybe he just pitied the old man I had become. The bus rumbled out of the city, leaving behind the glow of skyscrapers, and carried me into the darkness of the mountains. With every mile, the world grew quieter, more raw. By dawn, I was standing in the valley near Lake Arrowhead, a place where the air smelled of pine and earth, not gasoline and greed. And there he was, Thomas Reed. Older now, his hair silver-like, mine his frame still strong from years of working the land. He stood outside his farmhouse, a weathered building with peeling white paint and a barn that leaned to one side. He saw me, and for a moment, his eyes widened in shock. Then, without a word, he walked forward and wrapped me in his arms. "William," he whispered, "what happened to you?" And I broke. For the first time in decades, I wept openly like a child. I told him everything, the accusations, the betrayal, the storm, the exile. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every word. When I finished, he looked me straight in the eyes. "You fool," he said softly, not unkindly. "I warned you years ago. Julia was never to be trusted. Cynthia even less. And David, he lost himself the moment he began chasing after that secretary of his. I told you, William, you gave them too much power. You forgot who you were. His words stung because they were true. I had ignored every warning, blinded by love for my family. I thought my sacrifices would bind them to me forever. But instead, my kindness had made me weak in their eyes. Thomas took me inside. The farmhouse smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. His wife, Margaret, greeted me warmly, her eyes full of pity, but also respect. Unlike Julia, she treated me as though I still mattered. For days, I slept in their guest room, my body healing from the storm, but my heart still bleeding. Life in the hills was slow, steady, honest. Thomas and I would wake at dawn, the mist still clinging to the fields, and we would walk the rows of crops. He showed me how the soil spoke if you knew how to listen. He showed me how the hands could heal what the heart could not, and slowly something began to change in me. One morning, as the sun rose behind the mountains, painting the sky gold, Thomas said, "William, you came here broken, but I see fire in your eyes again. Do you know what that means?" I nodded slowly. "It means I'm not done. They buried me alive, Thomas. They thought the old man was finished, but they were wrong. I will rise again." Thomas smiled, but there was steel in his voice when he replied, "Then rise carefully. Revenge is a dangerous fire. It can warm you, or it can burn you to ashes. If you want to take back what's yours, you must be smarter than them, stronger and patient." His words sank deep, and from that day, the hills became not just my refuge, but my training ground. I began to rebuild myself. Every morning I chopped wood until my arms ached. I ran the slopes until my lungs burned. Margaret taught me simple remedies with herbs that cleared my mind and sharpened my memory. Thomas showed me how to fight not with fists, but with strategy. "A businessman like you," he said, "knows the power of patience. Apply it now. Let them think you are gone. Let them lower their guard. And when the time comes, you strike." And so, in exile, I was reborn. The storm had cast me out, but in the silence of the mountains, I found clarity. I was no longer William the betrayed, no longer William the father, the grandfather, the husband cast aside. I was William, the man who would rise from the ashes. And deep inside, I promised myself this. One day, I would return to Los Angeles, not to beg, not to plead, but to reclaim everything that was stolen from me, and to make them all pay for the night they threw me into the storm. They say time heals all wounds, but I learned in those hills, time doesn't heal, it sharpens. It turns grief into steel, betrayal into fire, and silence into a weapon. In the city I was a broken man, but in the mountains with Thomas at my side I began to transform. The mornings started before the sun. I would rise when the first rooster crowed, pulling on the same old boots every day, boots that soon became as worn as my soul. The cold mountain air bit into my lungs, but I welcomed it. I needed the sting, the reminder that I was still alive. Thomas handed me an axe the first morning and said, "Start here." I laughed at first. Me, a man who had signed $1 million contracts, now reduced to chopping wood like some hired farmhand. But Thomas only smiled. "William, revenge isn't won with soft hands." And so I swung that axe until blisters tore my palms open, until my back screamed and sweat dripped down my face. Each strike was a memory. Julia's cruel words, David's cold eyes, Cynthia's mocking laugh, Frank's smirk. Every blow split not just the logs, but the chains that had held me captive in that house. Weeks turned into months. I learned the rhythm of the farm, the planting, the watering, the harvesting. I learned how to listen to the silence, how to let patience guide me. And slowly my body grew stronger, my mind sharper. But it wasn't just the farm work. Thomas had other lessons for me. At night, when the stars glittered above the mountains, he would pour us a drink of his homemade whiskey and we would sit by the fire. That's when he would speak about strategy, about control. "Your enemies are not in the fields, William," he said. They're in the shadows of boardrooms, in the whispers of deals. You built your empire once, you can build it again. But this time you strike from the dark. They must never see you coming. His words lit something inside me. I began to recall the skills I had once buried under years of family and routine. The way I could read a contract. The way I could smell a lie in a business deal. The way I could command a room. These were my weapons, sharper than any blade, and I had allowed them to rust. Now, I polished them again. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Thomas handed me a small box. Inside was an old revolver, polished but heavy. "You may not need it," he said, "but sometimes a man must remind the world he isn't harmless." I stared at the gun for a long time. I had never been a violent man, but I wasn't the same William anymore. I took the revolver, tucked it into my coat, and nodded. Meanwhile, I kept track of the city. Thomas still had connections in Los Angeles. Through old friends and a lawyer I once trusted, I heard whispers of what was happening back home. David had tightened his grip on the company. He was funneling money to that secretary, Rachel, her name was, lavishing her with gifts, trips, promises. Julia had become the face of charity events, flaunting wealth that had once been mine. Cynthia was living like a queen under my roof, using my money to fund her reckless nights. And Frank, my grandson, was now suspended from school for fighting and smoking in the bathrooms of Roosevelt Middle. Every report was like a knife twisting deeper. I realized something then. If I simply walked back into that house, if I demanded justice in the open, they would crush me again. The courts were in their pocket, the lawyers loyal to Julia's charm and David's money. I had to play smarter. I had to use the one advantage. They no longer believed I had, my invisibility. They thought I was gone, broken, powerless. That was my strength. So Thomas and I began to plan. Step 1 was rebuilding resources. Thomas connected me with old business contacts, men who still remembered William Harris as a legend, not a ghost. Quietly, I invested in small ventures through Thomas's farm name, businesses in California that Julia and David had ignored. They thought they had the empire, but they hadn't seen the cracks beneath their own feet. Step 2 was gathering proof. Through a lawyer friend, I started pulling financial records, David's unauthorized transfers, Julia's misuse of funds, Cynthia's illegal parties funded by my accounts. Every secret they thought was hidden, I was bringing to light. Step 3 was patience. This was the hardest lesson. Every night I burned with the desire to storm back, to throw the truth in their faces. But Thomas reminded me, the trap must be complete before the prey steps in. Otherwise they escape. So I waited. And as I waited, I changed even more. My body, once frail, was now firm. My hands, once soft, were now rough. My heart, once desperate for love, was now hardened with resolve. I no longer dreamed of reconciliation, that William had died the night of the storm. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky blood red, Thomas turned to me and said, "You're ready." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. I walked to the barn where the revolver waited in its box. I strapped it to my belt. I stood before the mirror, looking at the man staring back at me. Not the broken father, not the unwanted grandfather, not the husband cast aside, no. What I saw was someone reborn, someone dangerous, and I whispered to my reflection, a vow that echoed in my bones. I am coming back, for my house, for my business, for my name, and for revenge. It had been nearly a year since that stormy night when they threw me out like garbage. A year of silence, of sharpening my will, of preparing for the day I would return. And finally, that day had come. I remember waking up before dawn, the hills wrapped in mist, the farm still asleep. Thomas stood on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, as if he had known I would leave that morning. He didn't try to stop me. He simply handed me the cup, his eyes steady. "You know what you have to do, William. But remember, this isn't just about revenge, this is about taking back your dignity." I nodded. Words felt too small for what I carried inside me. After finishing the coffee, I packed a single leather bag, the revolver tucked carefully inside, a folder of documents, and the strength I had rebuilt. Margaret hugged me, whispering, "Don't let them break you again." And then I left the hills behind. The bus ride back into Los Angeles was surreal. The closer I got, the more the memories burned. Every highway sign, every glimpse of the skyline reminded me of the life I had lost. The city felt louder, greedier than ever, but I was not the same man returning. I was no longer a victim. I was a storm cloaked in silence. I didn't go home right away. No, I was smarter now. Instead, I checked into a modest motel in Pasadena, far enough from downtown that no one would notice me, but close enough that I could watch. The clerk looked at me strangely as I paid in cash, probably thinking I was just another weary old man. Let them think that. Invisibility was my armor. From that motel room, I began the second phase of my plan, reconnaissance. I started with the company. Harris Enterprises, once mine, now under David's hand. I walked past the building one morning, my coat pulled tight, a baseball cap low over my face. The sight almost broke me. The glass tower still had my name etched in silver across the front doors, but inside I was nothing, a ghost. Through contacts Thomas had arranged, I learned the truth of what David had done. He had stripped departments of funding to pay for his secretary Rachel's lavish lifestyle. She wasn't just his mistress anymore, she was practically running the office, using my company's money to flaunt her influence. Employees were demoralized. Contracts were falling through. Harris Enterprises was rotting from the inside, and David was too blinded by lust to see it. Next, I watched Julia. She had become a darling of charity galas, standing in front of cameras with crocodile tears and polished speeches. "Helping the poor," she said, while stealing from my legacy to fund her vanity projects. I saw her, face on billboards and newspapers, smiling as though she had earned everything. My stomach turned. And Cynthia, Cynthia. That venomous girl had turned my home into a playground for her sins. My sources told me she was hosting wild parties there. Men and women coming and going at all hours, drinking, smoking, trashing. The place where my wife once planted roses. I clenched my fists when I heard this. That house was sacred. It was the heart of my family, and she had defiled it. But the one that hurt most to watch was Frank, my grandson. The boy who once sat on my lap and begged me for bedtime stories was now wandering the streets with gangs, smoking in alleys, skipping school. 13 years old, and already halfway down a road that ended in prison or a grave. I wanted to grab him, shake him, scream, "Don't do this. Don't become like them." But I couldn't. Not yet. The more I saw, the more I knew. I had been right to wait. If I had returned too soon, they would have crushed me again. But now I had proof. One night in my motel room, I spread everything. Out on the bed, bank statements showing David's embezzlement, photos of Rachel with company credit cards, copies of Julia's charity scams, documents proving Cynthia's illegal activities. It was all there. An empire of lies, built on the ruins of my sacrifice. But this wasn't enough. I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. The humiliation, the loss, the betrayal. So I waited again. I moved like a shadow, slipping into places they never thought I'd dare to go. I bribed a guard at Harris Enterprises to let me into the archives at night. I searched my old office, the one David now used, and found hidden files. I trailed Julia to one of her galas, watching as she smiled for cameras, and then followed her home, where she screamed at David for not giving her enough money. I even stood across the street from my old house one night, watching through the windows as Cynthia stumbled drunk through the halls, Frank slamming doors upstairs. My blood boiled, but I held back. Because Thomas was right. Patience, strategy. Finally, the opportunity came. Harris Enterprises announced a grand annual gala, a tradition I had started decades ago. It would be held at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, attended by the city's elite. David, Julia, Cynthia. All of them would be there, cameras, reporters, the perfect stage. I knew then that would be my moment, not just to return but to rise. So, I prepared. I shaved, cut my hair, bought a new suit. Not flashy, not loud, just dignified, commanding, like the man I had once been. I practiced my words, not in anger but in calm steel. I loaded the revolver, not to use recklessly but to remind myself that I still held power. And on the night of the gala, as the lights of downtown sparkled against the sky, I walked toward the Biltmore Hotel with the slow, steady steps of a man who had been to hell and clawed his way back. No one saw me yet. To them, I was still gone. Forgotten, but they were wrong. The old man had returned, and this time I wasn't here for love. I was here for revenge. The Biltmore Hotel stood like a jewel in the heart of Los Angeles that night, its chandeliers blazing, its marble halls echoing with laughter and music. The annual Harris Enterprises Gala, my creation, my pride, was now paraded under David's name. They called him the visionary, the generous leader, the man carrying the legacy forward. And I was supposed to be dead, erased, forgotten. But I wasn't dead. I was here. And tonight, the world would remember me. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, a shadow among the glittering crowd. My suit was plain, but pressed, my shoulders squared. Nobody recognized me at first. Age had deepened. The lines on my face sharpened the steel in my eyes. I watched them swirl across the room. Julia, draped in a gown worth more than most men's yearly salary, sipping champagne and basking in the cameras. David, his arm entwined with Rachel, laughing too loudly, already drunk on his own arrogance. Cynthia, dressed provocatively, flirting with two young businessmen by the bar. And somewhere in the mix, poor Frank, dragged along but ignored, fiddling with his phone in the corner. My blood burned, but I kept still. Timing was everything. When the speeches began, I made my move. The ballroom hushed as David stepped onto the stage, his smile plastered wide. He tapped the microphone, cleared his throat, and began his performance. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just about Harris Enterprises. It's about family, tradition, and the values we hold dear. I almost laughed out loud. Family, tradition, values. This man had none. But I let him finish. I let the applause swell, the cameras flash, the lies sink deep into every ear. And then, as the music began to play again, I walked forward. Slowly, steadily. People turned. Whispers spread. Is that? No, it can't be. He's dead. That's William Harris. David froze mid-sentence. Julia's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Cynthia's jaw fell open. Rachel clutched David's arm like a frightened child. I reached the foot of the stage, my eyes never leaving my son. And then in a voice that carried through every corner of that ballroom, I said, I built this empire with my hands, my blood, my years, and you tried to bury me alive, but here I stand. And tonight, the truth will speak louder than your lies. The room erupted in gasps. Cameras clicked wildly. Reporters rushed closer. David's face turned pale, then red, then pale again. Security, he barked, his voice cracking. But nobody moved. Even the guards hesitated, unsure if they should lay a hand on the man whose name was still etched into the very building they served. I climbed onto the stage, slow and deliberate, my cane tapping against the wood. I turned to face the crowd. You've all been told a story, that William Harris, founder of Harris Enterprises, passed away, that his son, David, carried forward his vision. But here's the truth. I was betrayed, cast out by the very blood I gave life to. While you applauded his speeches, he drained this company dry, lining the pockets of his mistress, Rachel, while Julia stole from her charities and Cynthia desecrated the home my wife once cherished. Gasps again, sharper this time. I could see reporters scribbling, recording, feeding on the scandal. Julia's face twisted in panic. Rachel stepped back, eyes darting. Cynthia's bravado faltered. David tried to speak, but his voice cracked. This is nonsense. He's a bitter old man, making up lies. I pulled out the folder from my coat. Documents, photos, evidence, I held them high for all to see. Lies, I said, my voice rising. Here are the bank statements. Here are the receipts, the photos, the proof. Years of theft, corruption, betrayal, all under the Harris name. And tonight I lay it bare before you all. The crowd buzzed like a hive. Some booed David. Others shouted questions. Julia tried to leave, but reporters swarmed her. Cynthia stormed forward, screaming, "You ruined us, old man!" I turned, my eyes cold. No, Cynthia, you ruined yourselves. I only came to reveal what you tried to hide. For a moment, chaos ruled. Security rushed to contain the press. Julia shrieked at David. Rachel tried to slip away unnoticed. And David stood frozen, his mask shattered, his empire crumbling around him. I leaned close, my voice low enough only for him. This is just the beginning, son. Tonight I showed the world your face. Tomorrow I take back what is mine. Then I stepped off the stage, walking through the stunned crowd as cameras flashed like lightning. Nobody stopped me. Nobody dared. As I left the ballroom, I could still hear the chaos behind me. The shouting, the panic, the unraveling of everything they had built on my ashes. And with every step into the cool night air, I felt lighter, stronger. The old man was no longer invisible. The storm had begun. The morning after the gala, Los Angeles was buzzing. Newspapers screamed headlines like, "William Harris returns." From the dead and family empire built on lies exposed. On every television channel, reporters replayed the moment I walked onto that stage. Some called me a hero. Others thought I was a ghost. But no one could ignore me anymore. David's empire had cracked, but I knew it wasn't enough. Words in a ballroom were powerful, but paper in a courtroom. Those words could end dynasties. And so I began the war I had waited years to fight. I sat across from Michael Turner, my old college friend, now a seasoned attorney with silver hair and sharp eyes. His office overlooked the Los Angeles Superior Court, a place he had spent decades defending men who had been wronged. I trusted him not just because of our history, but because he was one of the few who still saw me as William Harris, not some forgotten relic. Michael tapped the folder I had brought from the gala. "This is strong, William," he said. "Bank records, offshore transfers, even photographic proof. But we'll need more. We're going up against your own blood, and trust me, they'll fight dirty. Are you ready for that?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Michael, I've lived through betrayal, humiliation, and exile. My son already buried me once. Do you think I fear a courtroom?" He smiled faintly. "Then let's give them hell." The first hearing was set at the Stanley Moss Courthouse, one of the busiest in Los Angeles. The day I walked through those tall glass doors, whispers followed me like shadows. Reporters hounded me with questions. "Mr. Harris, where have you been all these years? Do you truly have evidence against your son? Is this revenge or justice?" I gave them only one answer. The truth deserves its day in court. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. David sat at the defense table, flanked by Julia, her face powdered too heavily to hide the stress, and Cynthia, arms crossed, smirking like a child who didn't understand the seriousness of the game. Rachel wasn't there. Rumors swirled she had vanished after the gala, perhaps to protect herself. When I entered, David's eyes met mine. For the first time, I saw fear in them. He tried to mask it with arrogance, whispering something to his high-priced lawyer, a slick man in a $1,000 suit, but the tremor in his hand gave him away. The judge called the court to order, and so the battle began. Michael stood tall, presenting the evidence piece by piece. Offshore accounts in David's name, siphoned funds disguised as charity donations, invoices for Rachel's luxury apartment in Beverly Hills, all paid from company money. Photos of Julia shopping in Paris with stolen corporate cards. Witnesses, former employees David had fired, who testified about shady deals, intimidation, and silence bought with cash. Julia tried to object, shouting across the courtroom, but the judge silenced her with a gavel. Cynthia rolled her eyes, whispering insults under her breath. David sat stiff, sweat beating at his temple. And then it was my turn. I stood, my voice steady, echoing through the chamber. Your Honor, for decades I built Harris Enterprises, not for myself but for my family. I gave everything I had to ensure their future. And what did I receive? Betrayal. My own son, my own blood, orchestrated my exile, stripped me of my name, and fed off the empire I built. This is not just a case of stolen wealth. This is a case of stolen dignity, stolen legacy, stolen truth. And today I stand not just for myself, but for every man who has been silenced by those he trusted most. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, listening intently. David finally spoke, his voice sharp with desperation. He's lying, he's bitter, senile. He abandoned us years ago. He's only here now because he wants attention. I turned to him slowly, my gaze unshaken. If I abandoned you, David, then who raised you when your mother passed? Who carried this company through recession, through lawsuits, through blood and sweat? Who gave you everything you ever asked for, only for you to squander it on greed and lust? I abandoned nothing. You abandoned me. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Julia tugged at David's sleeve, whispering frantically. Cynthia shook, her head glaring at me as if hatred could kill. The judge called for recess. Reporters outside swarmed again, microphones thrust into my face. Mr. Harris, do you think you'll win? I gave them the same calm answer. I don't fight for victory. I fight for justice. Victory will take care of itself. That night, back at Michael's office, we strategized long into the hours. He warned me, David won't stop. He'll smear your name, dig up your past, even fabricate lies if he has to. I sighed, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline. Let him. Lies have short legs. The truth always walks farther. But inside, I knew the war would not be easy. My son was desperate, and desperation makes men dangerous. Still, I was no longer the old man who had been thrown into the rain and forgotten. I was William Harris, and I was ready to fight until the last breath. Courtroom battles are not just about evidence. They are about endurance. Every day I walked into the Stanley Moss Courthouse, I felt the weight of 65 years pressing on my shoulders, but I also felt the fire of a man reborn. Each morning the press cameras flashed. Each evening the tabloids splashed headlines across California. David had once been untouchable. Now, he was the headline villain. But villains rarely stand alone for long. And the cracks began with Julia. Julia had always loved the spotlight. She thrived on social media likes, charity galas, and the sound of applause. But when the court revealed her Paris trips funded by company credit cards, her activist mask began to crumble. She had claimed to fight for justice, for equality, for the poor. But the receipts showed Chanel bags, Michelin-star dinners, and private jets. On the third day of trial, Julia's old associate, a woman named Claire, testified. She had worked alongside Julia in one of her non-profits. Under oath, she confessed that Julia funneled donations into personal accounts, vacations, jewelry, even Cynthia's wild parties. The courtroom gasped, Julia's face drained of color. I sat silently, watching. My heart should have hurt. Once, she had been like a daughter to me. But that night in the rain, when she looked at me and called me a thief, that bond had died. Julia's lawyer tried to spin it. She was misled. She didn't know where the money was going. But the evidence was too strong. And when the recess bell rang, reporters swarmed her. Cameras caught her breaking, screaming at David on the courthouse steps. You promised me. You said none of this would come out. The empire was fracturing in public view. And then came Cynthia. If Julia was a mask of respectability, Cynthia was chaos in human form. She strutted into court in leather jackets, chewing gum, rolling her eyes at the judge. She laughed when testimonies grew serious. She was a symbol of arrogance, of youth wasted in recklessness. But arrogance has a way of turning on itself. On the fourth day, Michael brought forward surveillance footage. Cynthia, late at night, entering Harris Enterprises offices with David. Both of them leaving with files, boxes, and flash drives. Documents went missing after those nights. Documents that could have cleared certain transactions or buried trails of fraud. The footage was clear. The jury leaned forward. David's lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed it. Cynthia's smirk faded. Her gum stopped chewing. For the first time, her confidence wavered. Outside the courtroom, whispers began. Did Cynthia help orchestrate the cover-ups? Was she complicit? The next day, Cynthia didn't show. Reporters speculated she had fled. But the truth was worse. She had turned. That evening, Michael received a call. Cynthia, terrified, had reached out through an anonymous number. She wanted protection. She wanted immunity. And in return, she would testify. When Michael told me, I sat back in my chair, staring at the city lights. My own blood's betrayal had cut me deeply. But to watch betrayal now consume them, it was a strange, bitter satisfaction. The next morning, Cynthia took the stand. The courtroom was electric. Julia whispered frantically to her lawyer. David's fists clenched. Cynthia, her voice trembling, confessed. She admitted David had funneled millions through offshore accounts. She admitted Julia knew, and that she herself had delivered money, files, even threatened employees to stay silent. She exposed it all, tears smearing her makeup. He told me to do it, she sobbed. David said no one would ever find out. He said his father was dead. He said he owned everything now. I just wanted to belong. The jury gasped. Reporters scribbled like mad. The judge struck his gavel for silence. David erupted, shouting across the courtroom, Liar! You were in on it just as much as me. But it was too late. The betrayal had split the fortress from within. Julia screamed at Cynthia, calling her a snake. Cynthia shot back, calling Julia a fraud. The defense table had turned into a battlefield. And I simply sat, my hands folded, watching. Years of silence, years of exile had brought me to this moment. They had once thrown me into the storm together. Now they were the ones drowning in it. As court adjourned that day, Michael leaned close and whispered, We've won already, William. They've destroyed each other. But I shook my head. No, Michael. Winning in court isn't enough. I want the world to know. I want their names to be etched in shame, so no father, no grandfather, ever suffers what I suffered. Justice isn't just papers and verdicts. Justice is memory. For the first time in years, I felt the heavy chains of betrayal loosening. The war was not over, but the tide, it was mine now. The courthouse was packed on the day of the final verdict. Weeks of testimony, evidence, betrayals, and confessions had led to this single morning. Outside the Stanley Mosque courthouse, cameras flashed, news vans lined the street, and people gathered as though history itself was about to be written. And in a way, it was. I walked in quietly, head held high. 65 years weighed on my bones, but my spirit felt lighter than ever. The whispers followed me again. That's William Harris, the man they tried to erase. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt alive. David sat across the room, his once polished suit now wrinkled, his tie hanging loose. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced with panic. Julia looked like a shadow of herself, her makeup heavy, her face pale, her hands trembling. Cynthia was absent from the family bench. She had been placed under protection after turning witness. Their fortress had already collapsed. Today, the rubble would be sealed. The judge, a stern man with silver glasses, entered the chamber. The gavel struck. Court is now in session. The jury filed in. Their faces were unreadable, but I had watched them carefully over the weeks. They had heard the lies, the shouting, the arrogance. They had seen the evidence, the stolen wealth, the shattered trust. They had felt the weight of my words when I told them betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. The foreman stood. The entire room held its breath. In the matter of Harris Enterprises versus David Harris, Julia Harris, and Associates, we, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all major counts: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. A gasp erupted in the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Julia collapsed into her chair, covering her face with her hands. David shot up, shouting, "This is a lie. He's tricked all of you. He's nothing but an old man with grudges." The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. Mr. Harris, sit down or you will be removed from this court." But David didn't sit. He raged, pointing at me with shaking hands. "You ruined me. You should have stayed dead." I rose slowly, every eye on me. My voice cut through the noise. "No, David, you ruined yourself. I gave you everything. I carried you when you were weak. I built a legacy for you to inherit. And you spat on it, on me, on our name. This court didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself." Silence. Even the judge didn't interrupt. For once, David had no words. He slumped into his seat, broken. The judge cleared his throat. Furthermore, the court rules that Harris Enterprises and all associated assets are to be returned to their rightful founder, Mr. William Harris. Custodial oversight will be established to ensure transparent management. Defendants David Harris and Julia Harris will face sentencing at a later date. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck one final time. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I felt the rain again. The night they cast me out, the night they called me a thief. I remembered the cold, the humiliation, the emptiness. But now, the storm was over. Reporters surged forward as I left the courthouse. "Mr. Harris, how does it feel to win?" one shouted. I paused, turning toward the cameras. This isn't about winning. This is about truth. Betrayal may bury a man for a time, but the truth will always raise him again. And to every father, every grandfather who has been silenced, know this: your voice is never truly gone. One day justice will hear it. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed like lightning. For the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt whole. As I stepped outside into the California sun, Michael walked beside me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "It's over, William. You've done it." I looked at him, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "No, Michael. This is just the beginning. They thought an old man could be broken, but the old man rose. And now, his name, his legacy, his revenge, they will never forget." And with that, I walked down the courthouse steps, not as the man they once threw away, but as the man who returned to reclaim everything, with justice in one hand and revenge in the other. The weeks after the verdict passed in a blur. David and Julia were taken into custody. Their names splashed across every newspaper and news channel in California. Harris Enterprises, once on the edge of collapse, was restored to my hands. Reporters called it the return of the founder. Investors who had abandoned the company came back, and employees who once whispered about my fall greeted me with tears in their eyes. For the world, it was a dramatic story of justice. For me, it was something far deeper. When I first walked through the doors of Harris Enterprises again, I ran my hands across the polished wooden banisters, the halls echoing with memories of decades past. Every corner carried the weight of sacrifice. Late nights, hard choices, a younger man's determination to build something that would outlast him. To think, my own blood had tried to erase all of it. I stood there in silence, feeling both sorrow and relief. Michael reminded me often, "You didn't just win a case, William, you reclaimed your life." He was right. But reclaiming doesn't erase the scars. At night, when the city quieted, I would sit by the window of my old study, the one David once tried to lock away from me. I'd stare at the skyline of Los Angeles and think of the night I was cast out. Rain pouring, thunder rolling, my son's voice calling me a thief. That wound may never fully heal, but pain, I learned, can be forged into power. Cynthia surprisingly came to see me. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual arrogance gone. I don't know what I was thinking, she admitted, her voice breaking. I was selfish, blind. I thought rebellion made me free, but it only made me cruel. I studied her for a long time. Anger burned in me, but so did something else. Maybe pity. Maybe the remnants of hope that not everyone had to fall as David did. I told her simply, don't waste the years ahead. You've seen what greed does. Now choose differently. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Perhaps some seeds of redemption were planted that day. And young Frank, my grandson. He avoided me at first, ashamed. The boy who once laughed at my warnings now saw the cost of ignoring them. Slowly, he began to visit. We'd sit in silence sometimes, other times he'd ask about the past. One evening he whispered, Grandpa, can you teach me how to be strong? Not like Dad was, but like you are? Those words struck deeper than any court victory. Maybe, just maybe, the future could still be saved. Justice had given me back my name, my company, my place. But it also gave me perspective. Revenge is fire. It burns hot. It consumes. But, if guided, it can also bring light. Mine had done both. Now at 65, I know my time ahead is shorter than the road behind, but I walk it without fear. My legacy is no longer in the hands of traitors. It rests in truth, in the story of an old man they tried to bury, but who rose again. And to those who still whisper my name, let them remember this. Age does not make a man weak. Betrayal does not make him forgotten. As long as breath remains in his chest, he can fight, he can rise, and he can reclaim everything. I am William Harris. I was cast out, betrayed, left to die. But I returned, and in the end, justice was mine.